Hi, everyone. I'm Jen, and welcome to the first episode of Magic Threads Connection Through String with me, Fibre Goddess. Um, like I said, this is the very first episode. I want to do a quick introduction of myself and just what the podcast is going to be about, where I came up with the idea, and yeah, where it's gone from there. I am Jen Thomas. I'm an indie dyer. I'm a spinner. I'm a knitter. I'm a cross stitcher. I've dabbled in crochet. I've done, tons of different fiber crafts, and I've met so many amazing people through this community, through this world. And I just think we need to delve into that a little bit more and talk about connection, what it means to people, and how the fiber world connects us. This is yeah, like I said, my first episode of my first podcast. So bear with me as I, look and sound a little silly and awkward. But yeah, I decided to just jump in. I was going to take notes, but we're off the cuff and we're going to see what happens. Um, like I said, I'm Jen Thomas, all of the fiber art stuff. I own a business called Fibre Goddess, where I sell hand dyed and hand spun yarn and spinning fiber. And I live in Mohkinstsis, which is Calgary, Alberta. And yeah, I originally come from the East Coast. I'm a maritimer at heart. And these first couple of episodes are kind of going to concentrate a little bit on the Maritimes and how I got started in the fiber arts. And yeah, I want to talk a little bit about connection because I think connection is what's going to save us in this world that we are in right now, where fascism has, as we're all too well aware, has taken over. It's a scary, scary world we live in. Children are getting kidnapped off the street. Um, you know, this is what Indigenous and people of color have been experiencing for years, and been trying to tell us and warn us about. And we're here. But I think the connections that we make and the communities that we build are what is going to save us and what will help us through these trying. Trying doesn't exactly seem like the doesn't encompass what I'm trying to say, but trying times. Connection to me, just been thinking about this a lot because that's a question I'm going to ask every guest I have on the podcast is, what does connection mean to you? So I've been thinking about my own answer to that, and I'm having a hard time coming up with a question with an answer. Um, Connection is something that brings people together, whether it be a commonality, a common activity, like just something you have in common. Maybe you're both from the same place. That's a little bit of a connection. And sometimes connections build on top of each other, I really feel like. There are people I've met in the fiber world that are I met them because of knitting or something online. And then I find out that they're really into politics and social justice. And that has, compounded with our previous connection. And then suddenly we're like online besties and talking and chatting all the time. And connection can just mean lots of different things. Connection can mean things with the past, connection with our past, which is what I want to talk about today. And also just connection with the future and what that means. Can mean connections with friends, make connections with businesses, with community, with really connection can mean so many different things to so many different people. And that's what I want to explore. I named the podcast Magic Thread because there is magic in those connections. And I see it all the time, online, in community, everywhere I go. There's magic there. And as a witch, I, really believe in magic. And I believe that magic can be healing. And I believe that connection can be healing. And couldn't we all use a little bit of healing right now? So yeah, that's sort of where I want to go with this podcast. The first couple, I'm going to be just talking about my own experiences, and then I want to start having some guests on, getting into the logistics of the podcast. I want to release an episode a month, because that can sort of not overwhelm me, if that makes sense. I have a lot of shows coming up. And I don't want to completely overwhelm myself with trying to get out a podcast every week. And I feel like there's, yeah, some room to do that once a month. So I'll always post about it on Instagram, on Facebook, all of the socials. So if you follow me there, you'll get updates when there's an episode coming out. And I'm going to try to do this both on audio and video. So videos will be up on my YouTube channel, and audio will be on all of the wherever you find your podcasts. Um, yeah, I think that's kind of the logistics that I wanted to talk about. When I start to, Whenever I think about connection and fiber arts and crafts, I immediately think of my grandmother. My grandmother was the person who taught me how to knit when I was, don't even remember, to be honest, but I'm going to say probably 7-ish years old. I continued to knit all through my childhood, and crocheted a bit in there, which is really funny because I don't really know how to crochet now, but uh, I used to. And she taught all of us, or she tried to teach all of her grandchildren how to knit. I was sort of the one who really, I guess, I don't know, kept up with it, did something with it into now that it's actually, my career and my job and my business. My She also was a big sewer. My grandmother sewed all of her clothes, all, like, she wore dresses constantly, kind of house dresses. She was a farm woman, lived on a farm, churned butter, milked cows. I grew up going to their house every single Sunday of my childhood. And yeah, she taught us all how to knit. There are 10, 11, losing count, but she also, like I said, she sewed. My cousin Linda is a sewer, so she kind of is carrying on that torch from my grandmother, and I'm the knitter. And that I am ever, ever so grateful to my grandmother for teaching me this skill and this art and this craft. And yeah, she taught me so many things, but this connection with her is is the one thing that I really cherish. She like I said, she also grew up on a farm. My great grandmother also, churned her own butter and all of the things. And yeah, my grandmother was always, there was always knitting around. Always, it was just laying next to her chair in the living room was her knitting. And she, yeah, continued that. The Yeah, sorry, now I'm thinking about my grandmother. I'm gonna warn you, I might cry just because, um, yeah, my Grammy is very special to me. Uh, she, I continued knitting kind of through maybe junior high, high school. I was a typical teenager, too cool for school, didn't really You know, knitting is for grandmas. Anyway, insert eye roll for those of you listening. Um, she, yeah, but in university, I went to Mount Allison, which is a tiny, tiny little liberal arts school in New Brunswick, where I grew up. And it had one store in town, basically. It's called Stedman's. It was a department store, and it was like the one store. There was like also a drugstore and a grocery store. But if you needed anything like sort of non-medicinal or non, groceries, it was Stedman's. That's where you went. Um, Shout out to Stedman's in Sackville, which no longer exists, and it makes me really sad. I went back there this summer. Um, and I was in university and I was looking for, I'm tall. For those of you who have never met me in person, I'm a tall person. I get that a lot where people are like, I didn't realize how tall you are. So I'm a tall person. And in university, I was looking for a crossbody purse that the strap was actually long enough to fit me and that I could wear across my body comfortably and that it would like sort of land on my hip rather than up higher. Couldn't find one because I was in a teeny tiny little small town. So I decided to make one. So I went to Stedman's. They had this little tiny knitting section or like yarn section in the back of the store with knitting needles where I picked up, the metal knitting needles. And the yarn that they had there was Briggs and Little because I was in New Brunswick. And for those of you who don't know Briggs and Little, it is the oldest um, mill in the country, and it's in New Brunswick, where I'm from. And so, yeah, that was the yarn that was there. And I remember I picked out this like brown yarn and I knit myself and like a little wooden toggle button because it had been years and I didn't want to try to knit a buttonhole because that seemed way too complicated. But knitting a rectangle and then seaming it together with a flip over with a flip over co closure, I guess, seemed in the realm of possibility. So I did, and I used that purse for years, actually. It sort of felted together and just became this like really great little purse. That was how I got back into knitting. And then I moved to Fredericton after Mount A. And one of my roommates was also a knitter. Her name was also Jen. And we would we would sit on Sunday mornings and watch Coronation Street and knit together. Um, so yeah, that was sort of like where how I got back into knitting. And then as I got older, I got more into, yeah, started when I had babies, I was really into like hand woven baby wraps. And that whole process really fascinated me, like the yarn and what they were using and like what materials they were using and the color combos. And I took some classes at Olds college at Fibre Week up around dyeing and spinning and all of the things. And here I am today, making my living as a fiber artist. So, yeah, that's sort of like my very brief history with my own personal history with the fiber arts and where I came from. And for those of you who are watching, you'll see this. But something that I was just gifted from my aunts is something that I'm I'm probably gonna cry when I'm talking about this. So my Grammy, she's still alive. She's in her 90s, but she has dementia, and she doesn't really know me, hasn't known me for a little while, and that's really hard. She's not really, able to do what she used to do, and that includes knitting. But my aunts, I'm going to show it here. My aunt sent me this was my grandmother's last knitting project. And She almost exclusively knits socks. For anyone's looking on this screen, I'm not sure who she was knitting this sock for, but the sock is quite large. So I feel like maybe she was knitting it for someone. I don't know what was happening, but it's like it's really wide. It almost covers my whole face. I have no idea what yarn it is. It's feels like an acrylic. It's kind of bright green. So I kind of joked that it was a sock for the Jolly Green Giant. But this, I just also want to point out that these needles, the needles that are in still in the leg of the sock and the one that I'm holding, they're just plain old metal, like Susan Bates needles that you can get wherever you get knitting needles. And this is what my grandmother exclusively knit with. Um, these, I'm kind of sad. My aunts looked for them and they couldn't find them. This is a newer pair. There is some wearing on them, but she had a pair of these knitting needles that she almost wore completely through. And I would love to have those needles, but yeah, these ones still have some wear on them, but she used these needles for everything. Like it didn't matter. We look at knitting patterns now or crochet patterns or whatever, and there's gauge and there's use this yarn for this and use, what yarn. And my grandmother didn't, she was one of the most prolific knitters that I've ever met. And she didn't follow any of those rules, which I think is kind of badass. She, yeah, she'd never followed those rules. She just knit. She knew with the weight of yarn, she always used the same needles no matter what weight. And she knew how many stitches she needed for whatever she did. I never saw her use a pattern. The patterns were all in her head, whether it was for gloves, for mittens, for socks, that they were she just made them, which I really have great admiration for. One of the things I'm going to hold the sock up to the camera, and for those of you who are listening, I'm just pointing out a few little mistakes in the knitting. This was, like I said, this was my grandmother's last knitting project before she wasn't able to knit anymore. And these little, you can just see the little odd, pearls instead of knits or just little mistakes. It was getting really hard for her to knit at this point in the game. But she kept trying to, until it got really frustrating for her. But those mistakes were not I never saw my grandmother make a mistake in knitting in my whole entire life. So I know that things weren't quite okay with her when she was knitting these. Yeah. As I'm sitting here almost in tears thinking about my grandmother knitting these, but I'm so grateful and just um thankful to have these her knitting needles as well as her last project. I'm not sure what I'm never going to unravel it, obviously. I don't think I'm going to finish it. I kind of just want to have it. Maybe I'll put it in a shadow box. Um, I have a shadow box with some yarn that I spun and then she knit into a pair of socks that I've never worn because it was our like kind of only collaboration together. And so maybe I'll put these in a shadow box next to it and will live in my studio along with those socks as well. But yeah, I thought I would share this because it's a really cool connection and really um, heartwarming connection for me to the fiber arts and specifically to my grandmother who taught me how to knit. Um, on a weird connection note with that, my grandmother, as I said, she has dementia. She hasn't really, it's pretty far gone now, and it was getting worse over the years. And a while ago, I went back east. So I'm just gonna take a drink of water here. Um, a while ago, I went back east and I brought my little electric spinning wheel, my EEW, with me because it fit in my suitcase and I was going to be there for a month. So I figured it was the perfect time to do some spinning. My grandmother never spun, but I was going up and spending the morning with her. And I brought my wheel with me, and we were sitting there at the table, and she was just watching, and she was just watching so intently. And then she started talking, telling me this story about how she used to wind the yarn. And for those of you who aren't or who are listening, she was moving her hands kind of in the same motion as you would use a nitty knotty for. So I was like, oh, she's actually like remembering winding yarn off a bobbin. And it was I believe her, I'm trying to remember the connection now. It was her grandmother or step grandmother, I believe, who was a spinner. And when she was little, she would get my grandmother to wind the yarn off the bobbins for her into a skein. And my grandmother remembered that and she remembered the movement. And then she was telling me that my great grandmother used to have sheep and that she was the last person sort of around to have sheep. And she said that the wool man would come and get the wool and then they would get back yarn. And I was like, okay, that seems a little not suspicious, but I was like, okay, the wool man would come to pick up yarn, to pick up wool. And so she was telling me this story and I was just, nodding along and being like, okay, great. The wool man came. And then she said, and then he would come back with the yarn, and then we would have yarn and we would make, socks or hats or mittens or whatever we needed to get through the winter. And I was kind of laughing when I got back to my parents' house. And I was like, yeah, Grammy was telling me that the wool man used to come get wool, pick up wool. And my dad said, yeah, that's true. I was like, what? What are you talking about? Who's this like mysterious wool man? And Briggs and Little used to drive around to all of the rural farms around the Maritimes and pick up wool. And I'm sure they would keep part of the wool as payment, but they would pick up the wool and spin it for people and then bring back the yarn for them. So that was a really cool connection and something I had no idea that used to happen in rural New Brunswick. So I'm really grateful to my grandmother for telling me that story and then my dad for helping me not just dismiss what she was saying. Um, Recently I was in New Brunswick and my grandmother kind of doesn't really know what's happening anymore. But I would always bring my knitting with me when I would visit her in the home, and it really impacted me because she kept watching me and she kept just staring at my hands. And I could tell that there was a recognition deep inside that she knew what I was doing and that she used to do it. Like there was just this almost cellular, deep recognition in her that knitting was something that she knew. So that really blew me away, and that these crafts um, that we do have such a deep connection for us that we can even, you know, there's that little bit of recognition even in the midst of dementia. Um, yeah, so that felt like a really magic moment of connection again with with this world of string and how it connects and there's yeah. Anyway, before I do have one more really quick story to tell as well, and it's about another familial connection on my dad's side as well, but not on my grandmother's side, but on my grandfather's side. Apparently, she, so this would be my grandmother's mother-in-law. When they first got married, she lived with them. I apologize to any of my family who might see this and I'm getting details wrong, but I believe she lived with them and she was a spinner. Which I had no idea. I had no idea that anyone in my family had been, I mean, I'm sure way, way back, but at least no one that anyone remembered. She was a spinner, and one of my aunts, I can't remember which one, mentioned that they thought when they were cleaning out the old house that they had found something that they thought had to do with spinning. And so I said, okay, well, if you come across it again, I'm definitely interested because that's really cool. And I had no idea that, my great grandmother was a spinner, and you know, this is what I do. And they found it. And I may have posted about this my on social media before, but because I'm talking about my familial connections, today I thought I would bring them out as well. But they are my great grandmother's hand carters, and they are well loved. You can see how well loved they are. Um, the leather on them is sort of, coming off, and the tines are all bent for those who are out there in audio land and can't see. But just, yeah, picture this really cool set of antique hand carters that used to belong to my great grandmother, and now they belong to me. And her hands held these and worked with wool, and now my hands are holding them. And I will admit, I haven't done any carding with them just because I'm a little afraid to damage them because I don't want them to, but I think I'm gonna have to do at least one project with them so I can feel that magic, that energetic magic, um, and connection with her while I do it. So yeah, I'm ridiculous. But yeah, that's what that's my last sort of familial connection with the fiber arts. I do have yeah, lots of other people in my family have done like crafts. My great aunt used to embroider a lot. I have a cousin who also knits on that side of the family, and like there's still lots of other connections, lovely connections, but these were the ones that I felt like had a little bit of magic to them, and I wanted to talk about that on the first episode of Magic Threads, Connection Through String, because these connections run deep um, in my soul, in my genetics. And yeah, I hope I didn't blather on too much, and I hope you didn't get too bored. But yeah, this is what kind of like I said, the next episode I'm going to talk about it, sort of a non-familial connection with a really cool story. But and then after that, I'm gonna have some guests on. So if you think you'd like to be a guest, if you have an idea of a really cool connection, let me know. I'm on all the socials. Follow my YouTube channel. I'll be updating on the podcast on my Instagram, Facebook, all of the things, just Fibre Goddess, Fibre, for anyone in the US. I use the Canadian spelling. And yeah, if you liked, please subscribe. And this was kind of fun. So I hope you'll keep coming back for more episodes. Thanks so much. Bye.